But what I hope to do today is challenge any of those notions that you might have, that there are biologically determined gender roles. The other title that I was going to do today, that I was going to name this talk, was Pimps and Sluts, Gender Differences, Gender Inequality. And that one might have been a more arresting title at first glance, but that would be the subject of future talks. So, for the sake of clarity, I'm going to just confine the scope of this presentation to male and female sexualities. And so in order to do that, I'm going to borrow a story that I'm taking from Michael Kimmel, who's a noted sociologist. But before I do that, I'm going to offer some historical perspective on sociobiology and kind of where these ideas come from. So, sociobiology emerged as a coherent field in the 1970s, and since that time, sociobiologists have kind of argued that male and female sexuality is the result of evolutionary development. Males and females use reproductive strategies, and you'll see why I do that later, to ensure that their genes are passed on to subsequent generations. So that's, in various ways, males work to ensure that their genes are passed on to their offspring or future generations, and so do females. So some things to consider. A male has billions of tiny sperm, and a female one gigantic ovum. And should fertilization occur, the woman will endure a 36-week pregnancy before a baby is born. So that 36-week pregnancy is that gestational period. I'm going to be throwing out a lot of terminology that you're not going to be hearing a lot in the hallways or other stuff like that. I hope it doesn't make you too uncomfortable. I don't care. So, in order for a male to be successful, reproductively successful, he must fertilize a great number of eggs, right? After all, that's why he has billions of tiny little sperm. So, males are naturally promiscuous. It follows. And I'm going to pause here just to remind you that this is the sociobiological perspective that emerged out of the 1970s, and we're still riding the wave. Because females must invest a great deal of energy in gestation and lactation, females are going to be naturally choosy. And they're only going to seek sexual partners that will make good parents. Females will also not engage in any kind of sexual conduct until they've extracted an emotional commitment from their male sexual partners. And so that females would naturally tend toward monogamy. So a quick recap. Males are sexual predators, and females are consumed by romantic fantasies of commitment and are sexually reticent. What other explanations do we have from sociobiology? What about, well, we can use the hunter-gatherer societies as a way to explain gender difference today too. The hunters, males, need consistent cooperation and solidarity. And so women were excluded from hunting groups because their menstrual cycle prohibited such consistent cooperation. Also, women's maternal instinct made them poor hunters because, let's face it, they couldn't kill anything. And so then they would just stay home with the children. And that's why we have, women would say they have a maternal instinct, they stay home, then they're better caregivers. Never mind, two things, never mind the many studies that have been done recently that show no matter what point in the menstrual cycle, it doesn't affect performance, doesn't affect test scores. Never mind that the great infanticides in Greece and Rome, most of the killing of children was done by women. That's not important. They needed to stay at home and take care of the children because of their maternal instinct. Today, we also sociobiology also embraces evolutionary psychology, which is the idea that the temperaments of males and females have been honed over centuries, and they manifested in the things that were honed over centuries were manifest in temperament. So males are aggressive, controlling, and managing, and women are more reactive and more emotional and passive. Again, the temperaments are a result of evolution and therefore biology. Has anyone not heard this before? In some way or another, maybe not so starkly or negatively. Raise your hand. So the problem with all these arguments is not that the data I'm using is wrong, but it's selective. The data that sociobiologists have used is convenient. And to prove that, this is a story I'll be borrowing, I can take other bits of data that is also true and kind of create the antithetical story. So let's try. So we're going to take the same evidence about the sperm and the egg and reproductive strategies. And again, the reproductive strategies are what the male and female are doing to ensure that their genes are passed on to future generations. That's the whole goal. And we're going to take the same assumptions about parental involvement. So women are the primary caregivers and men are not. So a couple things to point out. The human female is the only female primate to not have an overtly signaled estrus, which means that she is sexually receptive at any point in her reproductive cycle, even when she's incapable of fertilization. Also, the human clitoris is there purely for pleasure. It has no role in reproduction whatsoever. So, when you think about these two things, they lend themselves to the idea that females were kind of evolutionarily produced to enjoy sex, and reproduction was kind of an aside thing. Another point is that when a child is born, the identity of the mother is certain. The identity of the father is not. And, before DNA testing, you can never really be certain of paternity. So, now that remember the reproductive strategies, we want to make sure that the genes are passed on from males and females to subsequent generations. It makes sense for females to go around and have sex with as many males as possible, deceive them, and have them think that the child that is born is their child, and they're helpless to do anything about it because they want to make sure that their genes are passed on, and they can't risk that child being their child and not providing for it and it dying, because then it would have failed its reproductive strategy, and then it's passed its genes on. And it gets harder on males. So when women are in close contact for a long period of time, their menstrual cycles tend to synchronize. And also in societies where artificial light is not used, so much of human history, women will tend to ovulate at the new moon and menstruate at ovulate at the full moon and menstruate at the new moon. And so what happens is it makes it impossible to establish paternity, say as if it is approaching the full moon and the woman is beginning to ovulate, or gets close to ovulation, and she has sex with as many male partners as she can, then again, you don't have any idea who the father is. There's no way to actually prove it before DNA. So, because males would be exhausted if they were as promiscuous as their female counterparts, and they had to care for all those possible offspring, the males would tend toward monogamy, even though the females were, promiscuous. And maybe the males would invent ideas of female chastity, or refuse to sexually commit to, i.e. marry, women who weren't virgins. They might even invent an ideology of domesticity to keep women in the home and keep them from indulging in their natural promiscuous behavior. So what do you think about that story? Sound plausible? So another fun fact. When a female chimpanzee is in estrus, she'll have sex up to 50 times a day for 15 minutes, non-stop, day and night, and move on to the next partner. The female baboon is aggressive, dominant, and sexually aggressive and socially dominant. These are all these facts that the sociobiologist has kind of ignored in explanation of human behavior. And I'm not saying that the point of the story that is the antithesis to this is not to say that my story is better than the other one, but it's just to show you that sociobiology, which if you haven't caught on, looks at society today and then reads the social story into biology and evolution. It doesn't provide us with any kind of really useful explanation for why we are the way we are. And that brings me to the definition of the definitions of sex and gender. So sex you can think of as biological. So it's our external genitalia, the difference in hormones, the difference in height, so that's sex. Gender is socially constructed. And gender difference is what we're really talking about. And so, and maybe this can be the subject of future talks. When we talk about gender difference, we're talking about social differences and how men and women are valued and treated in the society. And gender can be thought of as a response to a lot of different social cues and social conditions.